I don't know about y'all, but I am pretty much sick and tired of this whole you'll own nothing and be happy scenario that is unfolding in the world around us. Let me know if y'all align with this. I sure don't. And if you're not familiar with this, there is a chip shortage. The chips that we use in our cell phones and our handheld electronic devices, laptops, computers, things like that, because of all this AI infrastructure, all the infrastructure they're building that nobody asked for. And we have to ask ourselves, is this chip shortage actually due to AI, or are we being misled? Is the main reason actually something a little more nefarious? So here's what I'm gathering from this whole chip shortage scenario. It's basically going to become very, very difficult for us, the consumers, to not only source electronic devices, but to afford them. Because they are now saying that this chip shortage situation is going to bleed down to the consumer, and it's probably going to do that in the very near future. Now, what is the solution to this? I'll tell you what the solution is, because there are already certain companies that are trying to sell us the solution. HP has come up with a solution, which is we are now going to rent you computers, laptops, electronic devices. That's their solution. Where have we seen this before? Haven't we seen this play out in various aspects throughout society? Does this not play into the whole you'll own nothing and be happy scenario? I would say that it does, because it starts off with, we're going to rent you a device. And that may seem very convenient for some people, because maybe not everybody needs to own a laptop. Maybe not everybody has the money to run out and buy a laptop, because they are kind of expensive. So a lot of people will flock to this idea, and they will buy into this solution in the name of convenience, because it is convenient for some people. However, we have to also think about how much this is going to cost us. Not just in terms of money, but in terms of everything. And let's start off with how much money this is going to cost. So the plans start at $34.99, and they range from that up to $129.99 per month. That's just renting the device. All right, so think about that. That's actually quite a bit of money. When you spread that out over the course of a year or a couple years, that could be hundreds or thousands of dollars. And the fact of the matter is, they're creating an environment around us where it is going to be impossible or near impossible to not have these things in our lives, because society in general basically hinges on technology and soon to be AI infrastructure. That is the direction we are headed. So most people are going to need some form of electronic device. And if you're renting that over the course of months or even years, it's going to add up. And with the scarcity of these chips, and with the fact that it won't be long that we'll probably be priced out of buying and owning electronic devices, and when you combine that with the fact that they are kind of pushing this agenda for owning nothing and being happy, I truly believe that we're headed towards a future where we're going to have to rent all this stuff. We won't be able to own anything. And if you don't think this is a real possibility, you might want to rethink that. Because you might say that this is not a new concept. Renting and subscriptions, it's been around for a long time. And that is true. Take cars, for example. People have been renting cars for a long, long time. But now, when you own your car, you still don't actually own your car, because now all these new vehicles, they have apps and features that are pay to play. You'll buy that car, and maybe you bought that car because it has heated seats and it has heated mirrors, so they defrost themselves, and maybe they have all these bells and whistles that seemed really convenient, and maybe those are some of the reasons why you bought that vehicle. And you buy that vehicle and you get home, and 2 or 3 months go by or a year goes by, and you find out that all those features that you bought the car for, they just turned off. And now you have to pay a subscription to keep those features turned on. Numerous car companies are now doing this. This is happening throughout all of society. If you think about all the stuff that we subscribe to today, all the stuff that we have to rent, it's not by coincidence. It all feeds into this agenda. Even buying a home now is basically a subscription-based model, because People are being priced out of that. Not many people can afford buying a home, and there's also a supply and demand issue because these large corporations have come in and bought up a lot of the houses, and they're renting them out. Why are they renting them out? Because a reoccurring revenue model is more profitable than selling a home to somebody. So everything is moving to this renters-based, subscription-based society. And if you really want to see the truth about what is happening with this stuff, listen to what these people are saying. Jeff Bezos just went on record not too long ago talking about how everybody essentially now owns their own data center. And what he was referring to was computers, cell phones, laptops. And he said that is not sustainable. Why is that not sustainable? It's not sustainable because they are using all of the resources and all of these chips for their AI data centers, for the stuff that nobody is asking for. They have put their best interests over the people. And the solution that Jeff Bezos is trying to sell us is he wants to rent us just the shell of that device without the internal components, because that's where the chips are. And he wants us to subscribe to the cloud and rent us space on the cloud, which is space that is pulled from an existing AI data center. And I'm sure they're going to sell it to us in a way that by doing that, there are going to be some benefits. It's going to be much faster. You're going to have all this computing power at your fingertips. You're going to have direct access to AI, all this amazing stuff. And there's going to be enough people to buy into this that it's probably going to happen, and it's probably going to proliferate, and it's going to lead to us owning nothing and not being very happy about it. But we have to ask ourselves, what are the implications of this? What is this going to cost us? And I can tell you it's going to cost us a lot in terms of money, because we're going to be renting the shell. We're going to be renting that cloud space. We're going to be renting all the apps and all the entertainment and all the other stuff that we have to rent throughout our lives now. In other words, a place to live, transportation, basically everything. So we're going to be essentially indebted to the system for our entire lives, and we will never be able to escape. So in a way, they're doing away with traditional debt, and they're making you indebted to the system because you have to subscribe to and rent basically everything. So the chances of you owning anything and getting away from payments is basically going to be non-existent. That is going to keep you in the system and keep you working your entire life, which is exactly what they want. And we also have to ask ourselves, what are the implications and what are the impacts of putting all of our data on the cloud? I mean, think about this. You don't have a local device anymore to store your data. So everything, you yourself, your personal information, everything about you is going to be stored and utilized on that cloud. And doesn't that seem like that's a massive privacy and security issue? Who do you think is going to have access to all that data? Who do you think is going to have access to the most intimate parts of your life? Your banking information, your photos, I mean everything. Everything that you store on your local computer and your local devices right now, that is going to be stored somewhere where other people have access to it. And if you don't think anybody else is going to access it, I would also rethink that. Because if history has shown us anything, it's that when the government or when somebody in charge wants information, they go to these companies and they get the information. But it doesn't just stop with that. The fact of the matter is, data centers are now a military target. The stuff that's going on overseas right now, it has proved that. Because Iran retaliated by firing on Amazon data centers. And they did that because the United States is now using AI for planning attacks and for fighting wars. That is the reality of our future. That is the reality of our present. And if you think about the implications of you putting all of your data and everything that you are, instead of on your local device, but now on the cloud, where it could be destroyed by some factor that is outside of your control, that's a very scary thought. And the fact that we are becoming so reliant on this stuff that we're essentially putting all of our eggs in one basket, that is equally as terrifying. And another major problem with this that we really need to consider is the fact that once this happens, or if this happens, if all this stuff actually ends up going to a renting and subscription-based model, The people that own that model and that own all of that infrastructure, they can basically write the rules. So who's to say that if electronic devices go away and we now have to rent all that stuff, that they're not going to say, well, in order for you to access your account or your shell of a device, you now have to submit biometrics. You now have to adopt the digital ID, or you now have to do fill in the blank. They can basically make you do whatever they want you to do, because if society hinges on technology for it to operate, what other option do you have? Where is that going to leave you? I would say that if you're not prepared and you haven't set your life up in a way that allows you to rely on more analog things, it's going to leave you pretty high and dry. It's going to leave you not being able to participate in modern society. And it may actually leave you not being able to perform your job if your job relies on technology. These are all things that we need to consider. And also consider that when you're reliant on the cloud and this AI infrastructure and something that is controlled by somebody else, there is also a very real possibility that they can control the algorithms. Censorship is very real. And there is a good possibility that that cloud or that data center or that device is only going to feed you the information that it wants to feed you. Maybe that's the information that fits the narrative. Maybe it's not necessarily grounded in the truth or in reality. That is also another very scary thought. And we see that happening today. It is actually happening with the internet right now. And it has been happening for quite some time. But if we don't own our own devices and we have no way to bypass these safeguards, we're left with relying on the information that's put out to us. And who knows what kind of propaganda and brainwashing and indoctrination that is going to lead to. So I would say overall that the implications of this, they're kind of dark and they might be kind of nefarious, and this is probably something that we want to avoid. But that begs the question, what do we do if we can't avoid it? Is there a way to combat this? And what is the solution to this future that we might be headed towards? I would say that we have a couple options. I think the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to just put ourselves into a position where we're not so reliant on all this digital stuff, because that is the direction that society is headed. But we as individuals don't necessarily need to be as reliant on it as the rest of society. And the silver lining here is that we don't have to be. It is still possible in society today to create an analog world around ourselves. And it doesn't have to be entirely analog, but I think the more that you can distance yourself from technology and simply not be as reliant on it, the better off you're going to be, especially in the future. And maybe that just means buying more tangible stuff, making sure that you do have a computer and that you do have the tangible electronic devices that you need in your life. Make sure you have that stuff now and make sure it's current and up to date. Maybe it also means owning more physical media, stuff like Blu-rays, DVDs, CDs, records. I see this stuff making a comeback, and that's no coincidence. People are buying this stuff because they're seeing where the future is headed, and a lot of people don't align with that. So they're making the switch. And maybe that's something we all need to start thinking about. And a lot of this simply comes down to not owning as much new stuff. Because when you think about new vehicles and all the subscription-based models that surround us today, it stems mostly from all the new stuff from the last 5 to 10 years. When you own products that were made prior to the 2020 or 2015 timeframe, it's much less likely to have these subscription-based models baked in. These are things that we simply didn't have to worry about 5 to 10 years ago. So it makes sense that if we want to get away from that, all we have to do is go back in time a little bit and buy products that were made prior to those time periods. And I think another very good and powerful way to combat this is simply not allowing ourselves to put all of our eggs in one basket, because that is essentially what society is doing. And I think that is going to leave us pretty vulnerable. That's probably not a position we want to be in, because what happens if something happens to that basket? I think the best thing that we can do for ourselves is to diversify the things in our lives. Just like it's a good idea to diversify your income and diversify your investments, it's probably also a good idea to diversify what you are reliant on and the means to which you are reliant on those things. For some people like me, maybe that means boycotting this subscription-based model and this renters-based society altogether. It's something I don't align with, so it's something I refuse to participate in. For other people, Maybe it just means subscribing to certain things and renting only what is necessary. This is all a very personal choice, and it's a choice that we all have to make as individuals. Because when it comes to this, there's really no right or wrong answer. But I think it pays to be informed. It pays to know what's coming and understand the implications of what that future might bring.